Ottawa Indians were first attracted to the Vermilion area by the red clay of its riverbanks. These early inhabitants used the red substance in making face paints for tribal ceremonies. They called the stream Oulanie Thepy, a phrase translated by an Indian commissioner in 1760 as Vermilion Creek. The town of Vermilion and the township in which it lies were both eventually named after the river which flows through their boundaries. The town of Vermilion is located at the mouth of the Vermilion River in the far northeastern corner of Erie County, Ohio. The village's rise from a fledgling frontier settlement to an important 19th century commercial and shipbuilding port on the Great Lakes can be attributed to the enterprising nature of the New England immigrants who settled the area. The township and the town were populated by people of New England lineage because the lands drained by the Vermilion River, at one time, were claimed by the state of Connecticut. When the state ceded all of its western land claims to the United States in 1786, Connecticut reserved a generous tract of land in northeastern Ohio. This expanse of land contained 3.5 million acres and became known as the Connecticut Western Reserve. Instead of disposing of the land by individual pieces, the Connecticut General Assembly decided to sell the entire tract. Only the western 12 miles of the reserve, called the Firelands, were set aside. This area, which included the township of Vermilion, was granted to the residents of certain Connecticut shore towns whose properties were destroyed by the British during the War for American Independence. The residents of these 9 towns suffered immensely at the hands of the British. The Redcoats and Hessian mercenaries had laid waste to everything. There was a critical shortage of food, clothing, and adequate housing. In despair, the sufferers turned to the Connecticut General Assembly for relief. Throughout the 10 years between the first incursions in 1777 and 1787, numerous memorials were sent from the towns praying for deliverance. Finally, on May 10, 1792, the governing body of the state of Connecticut released and quitclaimed to the sufferers 500,000 acres of land. The governing body of the state of Connecticut passed a second act in October 1796, incorporating the sufferers under the name of the proprietors of the 500,000 acres of land lying south of Lake Erie. The passage of this act, together with the statute of 1792, opened the way for the eventual settlement of the township and town of Vermilion. In 1805, the directors of the Sufferers Land Company overcame the last obstacle blocking the path of the settlement of Vermilion when they concluded a treaty with several Indian tribes to extinguish their title to the land owned by the company. William Dean, representing the Sufferers Land Company, concluded the Treaty of Fort Industry in which the sachems of the Chippewa, Ottawa, Shawnee, Potawatomi, Wyandot, Munsee, and Delaware nations ceded the lands in question to the company. Only the tasks of surveying the tract and doling out parcels of land to the respective grantees kept the sufferers from realizing their long-awaited dream. The job of dividing the land among the sufferers took place at the county house in New Haven, Connecticut, on November 9, 1808. A rather complicated but fair lottery was devised to distribute the parcels of land to the petitioners by chance. The officials of the Sufferers Land Company approved the committee's system of drawing tickets in bundles. Thus, the tickets from one box were matched with the bundles of tickets drawn from a second box until all the claimants were located within a given township and section. The names of those claimants situated in Section 1, which would become Vermilion, were as follows: Guy Richards, George Newcomb, Lydia Avery, Widow Nelson, Amos Lester, Edgecombe Lee, James Young, Limeon Walcott, Giles Mumford, Bridget Harris, and Elizabeth Plum. These individuals constituted the first proprietors of the land which later encompassed the town of Vermilion. The first white settlers came to the vicinity of the Vermilion River Valley between the years 1808 and 1810. The valley floor, with its flat terrain, good soils, bountiful forests, and abundant wildlife, was the main attraction for many of the early inhabitants of the area. The first resident, William Haughty, came in 1808 and erected the first house in the township. It was built of logs and stood on the lake shore near the mouth of the river. Following Haughty were Deacon John Beardsley, Solomon Parsons, Enoch Smith, and Barlow Sturgis, who all established residences near the mouth of the Vermilion River. John Beardsley resided near the mouth of the river until 1815, when the unhealthiness of the location and the subsequent sickness of his family induced him to move further back from the lake shore. He later became one of the prime designers of the first congregational church organized in the township. Enoch Smith also settled at the mouth of the river, but later removed himself from the lake shore. The Sturgis family came to the tiny settlement in 1810, where they opened a tavern and established a ferry. The early settlers found the land on the west bank of the river to be an ideal location for a settlement. It rose 15 to 20 feet above the level of the river and was heavily timbered. The first settlers of Vermilion also found a wide sand beach, from 4 to 15 rods wide, stretching from the mouth of the river west for the entire length of the township. The site also had another distinct advantage. The river provided the inhabitants of the tiny settlement with a natural harbor. The river channel was only about 7.5 feet deep because there was a lack of adequate feeder streams. Nevertheless, the harbor could accommodate the largest vessels running on the Great Lakes in the early 1800s. The settlers quickly recognized the easy adaptability of the setting to shipbuilding. The availability of timber furnished the residents of the village with the necessary supply of wood, while the steep slope of the west bank of the river and closeness of the harbor provided the occupants with a good site for the building and launching of vessels. The river also served as a means of supplying the early settlers with needed supplies and merchandise, and for the marketing of their produce. A fast schooner laden with local goods could reach Black Rock, Buffalo, New York, in slightly more than 72 hours. This was an important factor for all who settled in the valley, because it meant that the eastern markets, which were so highly coveted by the frontier farmer and craftsman, were no more than a few days' journey away. With such outstanding qualifications, it is no wonder that the early founders of the settlement thought that the frontier post would blossom into a great, thriving commercial metropolis. The realization of this dream was soon altered by the unhealthiness of the location. Although the records do not reveal that any great epidemics or plagues ever harassed the infant village, the marshland located across the river from the settlement acted as a deterrent to many a newcomer. This swampland extended east from the eastern limits of the Vermilion River to the present-day site of Linwood Park, a distance of approximately 1/2 mile. The presence of this swamp made living in Vermilion during the summer months difficult. The unwholesome nature of the marshy environment made the inhabitants clustered around the mouth of the river more susceptible to ague or fevers and other common maladies of the day. To escape the dreaded effects of the swamp, many of the new immigrants populated the areas directly west and south of the settlement. By 1812, a total of 13 families had settled the lands adjacent to the settlement. Like their fellow town dwellers, the settlers who inhabited the tracts of land surrounding the frontier post played an important role in the subsequent development of the settlement into a prosperous town. Not only did they exploit and develop the resources of the countryside, but they also made the wealth of the township available to the commercial interests of the village. While the forest of the area furnished the settlers with abundant supplies of game and lumber, the lands of the township provided them with good soil for the development of agriculture. The settlers also found the topography of the township excellent for farming. With good soil and a flat terrain, agriculture became the important industry of the township. Most of the immigrants who settled the lands surrounding the settlement tilled the soil for their livelihood. Although agriculture became the mainstay of the economy in the township, the settlers took advantage of the great abundance of timber in the area by erecting numerous saw and planing mills. The white oak provided by the forests surrounding Vermilion was used for the construction of lake vessels. One of the primary reasons that shipbuilding became such an important industry in the town, as well as along the northern shore of Ohio, was the availability and accessibility of good stands of ship timber. The remaining lumber was used to meet the local building needs of the community or shipped from the town's harbor to other Great Lake ports. Some of the earliest cargoes leaving the port consisted of cord wood, staves, shingles, ship timber, and masts. Even as the adversities and initial hardships of settlement were overcome, the townspeople of Vermilion set about the task of improving their cultural surroundings. By the mid-1820s, the settlement had grown considerably in size and number. In addition to the original buildings, the inhabitants built the first schoolhouse by the lake shore in 1814. The erection of this public school and the founding of a literary society in the town in 1821 demonstrates the great value placed by these New England settlers on education. By 1837, Vermilion had grown from a tiny settlement made up of crude shanties and log cabins into a thriving village consisting of a post office, public house, tavern, blacksmith shop, ferry, several general stores, a number of storehouses, and assorted family dwellings. The founding of industry was one prerequisite for growth in Vermilion. The goods of such an enterprise, whether they were pots and pans or sailing ships, were needed to provide the town with a commercial product for sale on the marketplaces of the Great Lakes region. Iron ore was a most important natural resource of Vermilion Township in the early years of settlement. A small deposit of this reddish-brown mineral supported a blast furnace, which operated about 2 miles south of the town at a site called Furnace Corners. The original iron furnace was small by today's standards, approximately 30 feet high and 9 feet in diameter, and was built and lined with native sandstone. In addition to the furnace, the other buildings consisted of an ironmaster's shanty, a business office and store, and a small foundry. The two principal ingredients needed to transform the ore into cast iron were charcoal and limestone. The charcoal came from the nearby forest, while the limestone was supplied by various quarries in the vicinity of Sandusky. The third and most important element in the process was the ore itself. At first, the furnace was sustained by small quantities of bog ore found on a nearby farm. When this supply of ore became depleted, new deposits were found along the old lake ridges on the southern side of the township. The furnace produced castings of various types for use in shipbuilding and supplied such items as stoves, plows, kettles, and miscellaneous household and farm implements to the natives of Vermilion. Although operations were later suspended and removed to a lot along the waterfront in Vermilion, the blast furnace located at Furnace Corners flourished during the decades of the 1830s and 1840s. It was erected in the mid-1820s and produced a small line of products. In 1826, the Ohio legislature incorporated the furnace under the name of the Geauga Iron Company. 4 years later, the foundry changed hands and was renamed the Huron Iron Furnace in honor of Huron County. The new owners enlarged the line of products to include gears for grist and sawmills and patterns for almost any other kind of castings. Perhaps the most serious limitation on the growth of the company was the shortage of labor on the frontier, which made it difficult to acquire men to fill positions. The Vermilion iron industry served a dual function. Not only did the company supply the countryside adjacent to Vermilion with needed goods, but it also was partially responsible for the growth and development which the town experienced during the ensuing few decades. The iron works boosted the economy of the small village which was trying to establish itself as an important lake port. Many tons of pig iron, which were made at the furnace, were shipped from the town's harbor. More importantly, the company furnished the shipbuilders of the town with needed supplies of nails, mast rings, and other assorted iron products to sustain that second prospering infant industry in Vermilion. The industry which gave Vermilion its early fame was shipbuilding. The laurels for the establishment of this activity rested in the hands of a small group of people who were skilled in this nautical art. These individuals, over a period of 32 years, 1809 to 41, built and launched 9 vessels from the west bank of the river. Though not great in number, the vessels carried the town's achievements to the far reaches of the Great Lakes. Solomon Parsons built the first schooner, named Vermilion, in 1814, the first sailing vessel to leave the harbor. One of the most notable of these early shipbuilders was Captain William Austin. He came to the valley in 1809 from his home in New London, Connecticut, and settled about half a mile west of the mouth of the river. His most colorful characteristic was his belief that he never had met any unusual danger without being warned of its approach. His warnings always came in the form of a raving white horse while he was dreaming. Throughout his long career as a sea and lake captain, this premonition paid him many visits. Not only was he a bold navigator, but he also was skilled in the science of building ships. His schooner, the Friendship, built in 1816. 2 other captains from the Lake Erie area, Augustus Jones and Fairbanks Church, gained fame throughout the Great Lakes as being the best shipbuilders in the region. For more than 2 decades, their achievements remained unequaled. They used their unique talents to build the fastest and sleekest vessels on the lakes. They were responsible for the marked improvement in the models and general construction of sailing vessels, which created a new era in shipbuilding by the mid-1820s. Their vessels, as a general rule, were far in advance of those previously built, both in sailing and carrying a heavier burden for their tonnage and in drawing less water. Among their most prized sailing vessels were the schooners Eclipse and the Lady of the Lakes. The 58-ton Eclipse was built by Jones in Vermilion in the spring of 1823 and was launched on June 26th of that year. She aptly was called one of the finest specimens of naval architecture on Lake Erie. These 2 vessels, along with the schooners Franklin, William, Vermilion, and Friendship, helped to establish Vermilion as one of the important shipbuilding ports on Lake Erie. The town's chances of becoming a major shipbuilding center were enhanced when Burton S. Goodsell, in 1834, established a shipyard on the west bank of the river. He further increased the community's reputation by building the steamboats Vermilion, 1838, and the Missouri, 1840. But the vessel that was considered the start of real shipbuilding in Vermilion was the South America. She was built in 1841 by Burton Parsons. After spending many years as a lake captain, this was Parsons' first venture into the art of shipbuilding. He made a contract with 2 men soon to become important in the economic rise of Vermilion. They were Ahira Cobb and Alva Bradley. All went well in the construction of the ship, and she proved to be a profitable venture for all parties concerned. This initial success by Burton Parsons and his associates ushered Vermilion into a new era of growth and prosperity. The first attempt to greatly improve Vermilion's transportation system came through a plan to establish the Vermilion, Birmingham, and Ashland Railroad. The line, known as the Vermilion and Ashland Railroad Company, was discussed prior to 1836 by interested individuals from Huron and Richland counties. The second and most important action taken by Vermilion citizens to improve their transportation facilities was the acquisition of federal monies to construct an adequate harbor at the mouth of the Vermilion River. For nearly a decade, the residents of the village had petitioned Congress for funds to initiate this project. Finally, in 1836, under the River and Harbor Act, $10,000 was appropriated for improvements to Vermilion. Work on two large piers at the mouth of the river was begun by the Army Corps of Engineers in 1836. At the close of the fiscal year 1839, the Corps reported that the West Pier was 1,400 feet long and the East Pier 800 feet long. As Vermilion's economic outlook began to rise throughout the 1830s, the strategic location and the value of the land surrounding the mouth of the river became apparent to many interested individuals. Although the town was a sizable village by the standards of 1837, it had not been officially surveyed, platted, or incorporated by the governing body of the state of Ohio. As a result, 30 well-to-do men from various parts of Huron County joined together for the purpose of investing their money in the sale of Vermilion real estate. In the narrowest sense of the term, these men became land speculators. They invested their capital in Vermilion with the hopes that the town's sudden burst of prosperity was not premature. Their main concern was to sell as many lots in the town as fast as they possibly could. In the long run, however, these men did the fledgling village a great service. Through the ceaseless efforts of proprietors such as Eli S. Barnum, Nathan G. Sherman, George Mygatt, and Charles L. Bolt, the town in 1837 officially became surveyed, platted, and incorporated. If Vermilion was ever to rise to the heights hoped for by the town's promoters, it was first necessary that the infant industries of the early years of settlement grow and prosper. Without an industrial base, hopes for expansion of the village would be lost despite any growth of transportation facilities. A favorable balance of trade was needed in which exports would exceed imports. This became the case in the 1840s and 1850s. During this period, Vermilion's golden age, the town experienced a great commercial and industrial growth that it would never know again. The fifth and sixth decades of the century brought prosperity, but could not guarantee a continuing success. The iron, lumber, and stone industries of the area adjacent to Vermilion were significant contributors to the city's commercial development and overall growth. These industries, which had their beginnings during the town's formulative years, matured and developed throughout the 40s and 50s. By 1860, they were firmly entrenched as Vermilion's leading industries. During this 20-year period, the iron furnace and foundry located at Furnace Corners were removed to Vermilion. They were located along the river just west of the present location of the Vermilion Boat Club and were known as the Huron Iron Company. In 1855, Philo Tilden of Vermilion purchased the company and renamed it the Vermilion Furnace. During this time, the firm employed an average of 60 men. Much of the iron for the furnace still was furnished by local deposits of bog ore. As these deposits became scarce, Tilden began importing raw ore from the Lake Superior region. This need for a greater supply of raw materials indicates some of the stability and permanence of the operation. The furnace's importance in the community also was high, as this single company accounted for nearly 8% of the town's total exports from 1850 to 1853. Iron, however, never equaled the importance of the woodworking crafts in Vermilion. The forests surrounding Vermilion supported a thriving lumber industry, which was responsible for more than one-third of the lakeside community's trade in the early 50s. Lumbering had begun to develop after Job Smith built the first sawmill in the Vermilion area in 1819. By the decades of the 40s and 50s, lumber products had become the town's leading export. Staves, whitewood lumber, firewood, square timber, black walnut lumber, and furniture lined Vermilion's docks. The white timber, extracted from the hardy white oak, was in much demand for shipbuilding because of its strength and resilience. Throughout this era, large quantities of building stone and flagstone also contributed to Vermilion's export trade. In terms of the value of goods produced, cut stone was the second most important commodity shipped from the town. Some stone had been quarried before 1842, but it was not until the 1840s and 1850s that the quarrying of stone became an important factor in the town's economic development. Most of the stone came from quarries or outcrops of limestone located in the township. Once the stone was cut, it was carried by wagons into the town for loading and shipment across the lakes. Some of the county's finest building stone was mined from the quarries surrounding Vermilion. Agriculture also significantly contributed to the commercial growth of the lakeside community. The rich and fertile lands of the township produced immense quantities of foodstuffs, which were funneled through the port of Vermilion for transshipment to distant markets. Grains such as wheat, corn, oats, and barley comprised the major portion of food products leaving Vermilion in the holds of the two-masted schooners of that era. Kegs and casks of flour, bacon, ham, butter, and cheese also found their way from the port to eastern markets. The importance of cheese as a commercial item can be seen in the construction of two cheese factories in the town. The local farmers also sent both fresh and dried fruit along with small quantities of pork, beef, hides, tallow, and lard to the port to feed mouths along the eastern seaboard. Indeed, this was Vermilion's golden age of commercial growth and development. Never before had the town witnessed such economic activity. During these 2 decades, the key word used to describe the town's industry and commerce was diversification. Many thriving businesses producing and exporting a wide variety of products. Even though the export totals for Vermilion did not equal those of Toledo, Sandusky, Huron, and Cleveland, the village's commercial interests did significantly contribute to the community's rapid development as a lake port. The two individuals most directly responsible for the town's status as a significant lake port were Alva Bradley and Ahira Cobb. As lake captains, shipbuilders, and owners of large fleets of sailing vessels, they helped to spread Vermilion's fame to the farthest reaches of the Great Lakes. Bradley began his sailing career as a cook's assistant and rapidly advanced to the rank of captain. While living in Vermilion, he became close friends with Ahira Cobb, and the two eventually became business partners. Throughout the 40s and 50s, they built up a large fleet of lake schooners and became extremely successful in their enterprises. In 1848, Bradley built a comfortable home in Vermilion and began to invest in real estate in the town. Cobb, in the early 40s, established a general merchandising firm in Vermilion. The partners' stay in Vermilion, however, was not to be permanent. By the late 1850s, both of these gentlemen had become involved in the iron ore trade. Because Vermilion lacked the necessary financial resources and facilities to operate such a large-scale business, Bradley moved to Cleveland in 1859, and Cobb soon followed his example. Out of their Cleveland offices, the two partners developed one of the largest fleets of carriers on the Great Lakes and became some of the most powerful figures of their day in lake shipping. The loss of Bradley and Cobb was a severe blow to the future development of Vermilion. Both of these men had been instrumental in the community's rapid commercial expansion. The development seen in the commerce of the harbor, along with progress in the iron, lumber, and stone industries, could never have taken place without the growth of Vermilion's most famous industry. All the economic activities of the area were linked in an important way to the growth of the city's most important enterprise, shipbuilding. By 1842, shipbuilding in Vermilion had risen to a point of complete dominance over all commercial activities in the city. Not only did it provide a means of employment for ship carpenters, laborers, and many of the local residents, but it also furnished many local businesses with a ready market for their products. Much of the white oak extracted from the forests surrounding Vermilion was used for the construction of schooners. The master builders also depended on the nearby iron works for a variety of metal products, such as anchors, chains, mast rings, nails, and stoves. The stone industry supplied the craftsmen with rocks for ballast, while the merchants furnished the sailors with food and other supplies. Thus, shipbuilding helped to contribute to the lakeside community's economic as well as physical growth. During this Golden Age, the all-important shipyards were located along the west bank of the Vermilion River. They were run by such able men as Alva Bradley and Ahira Cobb, Burton S. Goodsell, John F. Squires, Joseph M. Keating, Isaac W. Nicholas, Philip Minch, and Peter M. Brush. The combined efforts of these individuals accounted for the building of 26 vessels on the river bank and the rise of Vermilion to prominence as an important shipbuilding port on the Great Lakes. As early as 1834, Burton S. Goodsell established a shipyard in Vermilion, which soon produced a number of ships to carry local products. In the late 40s, the property was bought by Bradley and Cobb, who employed Minch and Nicholas as their shipwrights. Although Bradley remained in the community only a few short years, he was responsible for building a major portion of the 26 vessels built at Vermilion. A master builder in his own right, he, together with Cobb, contracted with Goodsell, Keating, Squires, and Nicholas to build vessels for their freight business. The launching of these carriers contributed much toward enhancing Vermilion's reputation as an important shipbuilding port on the Great Lakes. The years 1855 through 1857 were the busiest time for the shipbuilders of Vermilion. During these 3 years, 13 schooners were launched from the banks of the Vermilion River. In 1855 alone, 6 sailing vessels were constructed on the stocks along the river. The general prosperity of the nation stimulated the already growing commerce of the Great Lakes and influenced many companies to build and outfit additional sailing vessels with larger cargo capacities. As a result, only one steamship, the Indiana, 1848, was built in the local shipyards up to 1860. The narrow width and the shallow depth of the river channel hindered the shipbuilders of the town from undertaking such a task. The prime reason why steamers were not constructed along the river was that Vermilion lacked the sufficient financial resources to build such large and expensive craft. Only a few of the town's citizens were capable of raising enough money to underwrite such a venture. As a result, steamship building was developed at such ports as Toledo, Sandusky, Cleveland, and Ashtabula, where both investors and capital were more readily available. The industrial and commercial success of Vermilion during its Golden Age was partially a result of the town's unique transportation advantages. By the 1840s, the town was on the threshold of possessing 3 of the best means of transportation available at that time: road, rail, and water. The first 2 were results of the canal controversy which raged throughout Ohio during the second quarter of the 19th century, while the third was an end product of political maneuverings in the national capital. During the 1820s, The Ohio State Board of Canal Commissioners bypassed the Sandusky Valley Waterway in favor of two other canal routes. The route decision brought bitter criticisms from the residents of Huron County. The state legislature, not wishing to create hard feelings in the county, offered to construct several roads through the area in hopes of pacifying the disgruntled citizens. This resulted in improving Vermilion's future considerably as a turnpike was laid out between Richland County and the mouth of the Vermilion River, present-day Route 60. In the 1830s, public sentiment in Huron County began to rise in favor of better and improved modes of transportation, specifically railroads. The citizens of the area had not forgotten the canal controversy when they had lost out, and again brought the issue to the front. Such political clamoring prompted the state legislature to charter and subsidize several railroad ventures, four of which were to cross parts of the firelands. One of the railroads was to be constructed on trestles from Ashland, in Richland County, to the port of Vermilion. Known as the Vermilion and Ashland Railroad, it was capitalized at $44,000 and was to furnish the town with its second and most vital link to the heartlands of Ohio. The commissioners of the Infant Company, Francis Graham, Justin Sherman, Smith Starr, John P. Resner, and Jonas Strow, sold stock in the corporation to raise capital for the eventual construction of the line. From the beginning, the company was a speculative venture financed by many of the same individuals who were involved in other aspects of boosting Vermilion. These men were very much responsible for the speculative boom which had overtaken the Vermilion area. They were in hopes that the railroad, coupled with the town's favorable harbor potentials, would lead to widespread economic development and an increase in the value of their land. By 1846, their grand scheme had failed to materialize. In that year, the Ohio State Legislature withdrew its support from the enterprise because the company could not show any substantial evidence of progress in constructing the line. Even though the company became insolvent and its memory quickly faded from the scene, it left scars in the form of felled trees and unfinished roadbeds. It also was responsible for leaving blemishes of quite a different nature. The local citizen who had placed his faith in the capitalistic system and had invested his life savings in the company was faced with poverty and despair. But the real tragedy was in the impact that it had on the growth and development of Vermilion. There can be no doubt that an event of such proportions as the dissolution of the Vermilion and Ashland Railroad Company hindered the community's economic development. Not only did the town's commercial interests lose valuable markets in north-central Ohio, but Vermilion's business enterprises were forced to succumb to the dominance of their lakeshore rivals. Produce that otherwise would have been shipped to Vermilion now was sent to such ports as Sandusky, Huron, Black River, and Cleveland for transshipment. New railroads built to Ohio's northern lake shore attracted more and more of the town's trade and commerce in the direction of its nearest competitors. With the loss of a railroad connection, Vermilion had only one more hope of becoming a major port and continuing its growth during the Golden Age. Harbor improvements were needed to make the town a growing place, and funds for such a venture could only be obtained from the federal government. Ever since the first settlers had moved to the west bank of the river, residents of Vermilion had been influenced by Lake Erie and its surroundings. The industries that emerged in the town and the lifestyle of the people themselves became related directly to the lake. As the community began to develop, the citizens came to believe that the town's destiny lay with the lake and its growing commerce. As a result, they gathered their strength to persuade Congress to allocate funds for completion of Vermilion Harbor.